Bonjour mes amis, j'espère que tout ça va bien. Bienvenue à la troisième édition de Liam Small. This is. Sorry about that. Thought that was for my French podcast called Liam Small, Abridges and Reviews Fine Pastries and Delicious Wines. That's my French podcast. Once I finish that, I'll be doing a brief bridging of Saint Pierre et Miquelon, a history of Saint Pierre. You know what? I'm not doing that at all. In reality, this is the 15th installment of Liam Small, Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse, 20 pages at a time, every single goddamn day, until the bars reopen. I would do unspeakable things for a draft Black Horse right now, because Michelob ain't cutting it. The sour diesel is, though, pretty good. Okay, so we're going to dive right into episode 15. Coming off the heels of episode 14, we were talking briefly about, we were just mentioning the obvious nature of where the French and English were settling along the northern and western shores between Bonavista and Cape Riche, which Cape Riche, again, is sort of like down by where Port Basque is now, so they kind of had all the top, Bay Verde, all that shit up there, all the way up the northern pan, all the way down the back other side. Okay, so starting on page 280. Okay, so from the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, I'm starting to memorize dates. This is great. Which happened in Utrecht, Netherlands. I've been informed of. That would have been a simple Google on my part. The Treaty of Utrecht. So from the signing of that in 1713 to 1763, the English fishery grew rapidly. In and around Newfoundland, we had a lot of people coming back because the war was over and stuff. And I have here on page 280, there's just like a documentation of some returns and stuff, numbers and shit right there. These official returns prove conclusively the English occupation prior to 1763, and there can be no doubt that there were a number of smaller settlements which never made any returns. So again, he's proving the fact that it was growing rapidly. We have documentation of the returns. So to say that there was... He's just really stuck on, like, when and where English were at the time. It just seems to be, like, I will prove beyond the shadow of a doubt. So he goes against... this is kind of like his point about the early 1500s. Come back again 200 years later. Still... now he's doing the same thing for the French areas on the island. DW, we've established it, we know. We believe you when you say that we were here. I don't even feel like you need to back it up anymore, but I guess, cool. Okay, so around this time, 1763 and before, there's some dispute between the French and the English about where exactly the boundaries and settlements of the French fishery were. It's not super fucking interesting. I read through it. It's a lot, whether it's 49 degrees north or 51.5 degrees north, where French boundary actually stops, where the settlements were. There's a lot of numbers involved. There's a map on page 281 here. Newfoundland looks a little bit different again. So we have the French being from like about here all the way up around here, all the way back down to here. But again, that was hotly debated for like 50 fucking years or something like that. So this bullshit went on until 1778. So right into the English War of Independence. And the funny thing being, according technically to DW, they were both technically wrong as to exactly where the line was drawn. On page 283. So no, neither side was right. Looking hindsight is 2020, but looking back on it, there's a quote here. Is it 283 or 282? Well, as a matter of fact, both nations showed a marvelous ignorance in geography. Point Riche is actually situated a little to the north of Ignornashuas Bay. Fuck, that's as close as I'm getting to that one. There are other difficulties with the French besides the question of Point Riche. Many English settlers had fishing establishments and dwelling houses north of Cape Bonavista into French territory. The French claimed that they interfered with their fishery rights under the treaty and that they should be removed. I kind of buy that. The English government, as usual, did nothing. At this point, D.W. was actually saying in the book, he's like, as per usual, the English government failed to do anything important about this. Then we have here, whilst the French occupied Placentia, all the best places on the beach. So while the French had occupied Placentia, all the best places on the beach and the most convenient positions for fishing stations had been appropriated by the governor and his officers. A regular part of the business of soldiers, marines, and sailors was to catch for their masters. A small share was allowed to them, but of course the lion's portion went to the officers. The Frenchmen complained bitterly that they had not so much beach room and conveniences for the fishery at Louisbourg as they had enjoyed for many years at Placentia. Now, Louisbourg is over in, oh my god, I keep going to say Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, out that way, I think. Fucking double check me on that. Okay, so they did nothing, a whole pile of nothing. Talking more specifically about the fishery now, so that's the point I just mentioned, that, you know, the French were having some troubles and stuff, and given the debates between where the lines are being drawn and stuff, that was that. So Placentia remained under, remember I said when they signed the Treaty of Utrecht, like, we did get the French out of Placentia, but the governance of Placentia went to Nova Scotia, so that Placentia was actually governed by Nova Scotia from 1713 to 1729, but after 1713 in the treaty, the English sort of carried on the same way that the French did in Placentia, so there was some weird stuff, like they were settling disputes by, like, French rules and stuff, and I'm not sure, there's like a case in there listed specifically or something, but basically, it was just a period of transition. It was about 1713, so it was like 16 years of transition between, you know, the French rules and doing things the way, but it just took people time to adapt, and being that there was no real court of governance and stuff, or a set of laws set out specifically for Newfoundland at the time, it was a little difficult on how to find people and try them and stuff like that. So also Placentia, when the French had it, they didn't call it Placentia, they called it Plaisance. Fun fact I probably should have mentioned, episode 3? I don't know, when did we get Placentia? I don't even remember anymore. Anyway, so transitionary period in Placentia, so we have gotten them out of there. The French are having a bit of a fuck around over in Cape Breton. We don't know where the lines are being divided and stuff like that, and we carry on. We are in the reign of King George I, just to remember where we're at in time in terms of the monarchy. Okie dokie. Now, in year of our Lord, 1723, we have this guy, Mr. Skeffington. We just talk about Skeffington. He's not really that important, other than the fact that this guy, he obtained a grant for a salmon fishery in Freshwater Bay, not the one by the East Coast Trail. Freshwater Bay, Ragged Harbor, Gander Bay, and Dog Creek. This is all sort of in Central, so you think Twillingate Central, and eventually the Exploits Valley and Notre Dame Bay. And he had that grant for like 21 years. That's what he was allotted for it. So this was the beginning of a larger presence of the English in the Central region as this salmon fishery began to kick off. So now we're not just talking cod, whales, seals. Now salmon are involved more inland. So now you can imagine we've got some Englishmen starting to push from the coast in Central inland. I can't imagine what that's going to lead to. Anyway, we don't get there yet. If you know what I'm talking about, just wait. So, yeah, I'm just, this is going to come up again. So I'll simply just read. There's a passage here on page 238 that DW just kind of, amongst all the details and the backing up of his, like, little statements and stuff, once in a while he gives us, like, a nice, like, waypoint, like a fucking check mark, or a fucking save point, or something like that, outside of just being a regular chapter. Anyway, I'm rambling. I just want to get through this Michelob, so it's not doing it for me. How are you guys doing? If you stuck to, like, one thing the whole time, like, I'm getting sick of beer. Any suggestions on what to drink coming forward would be great. Or just send me some as a thank you for all the learning you've been doing, I'm sure. Anywho, okay, so on page 283, we have the whole of this period from 1714 to 1727 was like the heavy prosaic Hanoverian monarch, George I. They're saying this period was sort of characterized with the way he was characterized. Dull, uneventful, peaceful, and prosperous, which I guess no news is good news. Population of the fishery increased considerably. The trade with England for provisions almost entirely ceased. So the need to depend on England for provisions like salt, beef, pork, butter, bacon, they all came from Ireland. Fresh meat, livestock, corn, flour, lumber, lime, and bricks were all imported from the North American colonies, Woolen clothes were largely shipped from Ireland, linen and etc. from France and Spain, and from the latter country, Spain, Ireland, for which the Basque provinces have always been famous. Who didn't know that, right? The tyranny of the fishing admirals still prevailed. Remember those assholes? It was very much tempered by the interference of the naval officers who assumed their functions and, in a rough and ready sort of way, administered justice. The want of a ruler and a settled government was felt acutely at this period. Representation after representation was made to the home government on the subject, and at last, after many delays, in 1729, a governor and commander-in-chief was appointed. About fucking time. And that takes us to the end of Chapter 11, and therefore the reign of King George I. No appendix. No appendix at the end of that. I guess that's probably because I had that giant appendix in the last fucking episode. Oh, God, it was a lovely little appendix, like fucking 13 pages. Just skip right through it. Oh, man. I'm getting sick of this book. Honestly, guys, we're almost halfway, though. Also, if at any point, if like the 3 or 4 of you who are actually following this shit have any specific questions I can go back through or address or do anything other than just like barf at you guys, if there's any way I can make this more interactive, I'm happy to do it. Some way to fucking jazz this up, because it's a burden on every day I wake up. Anyway, okay, Chapter 12. The reign of George II, which happens between 1727 and 1760. 33 years. Pretty good by the standard that we've set here. Pardon me, take a drink. By the standard we've set here in this book. So, some important dates. I got a few of them here. I couldn't really tell what was important and what wasn't at this time. So, without any further ado. 1729, Lord Vere Beauclerc recommended for first governor. That's not why I'm... Okay, so in 1729, the island was divided into 6 districts. Doesn't say what they are. Don't even find them in the chapter. 6 districts, probably the ones we have now. What is it? Central, Avalon, East and West. Oh, fuck. Oh, I just really embarrassed myself there. I'll figure it out later. I'm on the spot because it's live, and I'm not doing any more than one take of this. 1731, Captain Clinton, RN, appointed governor. There's going to be a bunch of governor switches. Some of these guys aren't that important. I'm just mentioning them because it seemed important. Like 1733, Lord Muskerry, governor. I guess the point being we changed governors a lot. I don't know what the terms were, but it seems like almost every year, every 2 years, or whatever whatever was convenient at the time. 1735, great complaints of French competition in European fish markets. 1738, Captain Vanberg's account of inhabitants at Fogo and Twillingate, important. 1742, war between France and England. the re-warning. Captain Welsh prosecuted at Boston for bringing passengers from Newfoundland without reporting them, because remember we were supposed to be keeping track of this shit. 1745, Louisburg, Cape Breton, captured by Pepperell and Admiral Warren. Great rejoicings in England after the victory, won principally by New England troops. Admiral Watson is the governor. 1747, British-American officers are recruiting in Newfoundland. 1748, Peace of Aix-la-Chapelle between England and France. Louisburg restored to France. They gave it back. Great indignation in New England. Colonel Bradstreet is our lieutenant governor. Gives a fuck. 1750, Captain Francis Drake, governor. Commission of Oyer and Terminier to try felons in Newfoundland. R. Carter, Esquire, J.P. for Fairland. Murder of William Keane, the magistrate. So there was a guy who was a magistrate. He got murdered like Caesar style by like 6 or 7 different people. There was a bit of a plot. I don't go into it. But it was just an event of a major case in and around the Newfoundland court systems that kind of made things need to be... It was more of an example of why things needed to be really set in stone and a little ambiguity about what we were doing. 1754, Lord Baltimore. Fuck, remember that guy? Lord Baltimore renewed his claim upon part of Avalon. He had a big old chunk of Avalon for a while. Ruled that his title had lapsed. Okay? Nice try, Lord Baltimore. Thanks for playing. Talk to you later in the week. 1755, Richard Dorrell, governor. Roman Catholics prosecuted for celebrating Mass. Bradley reports from Fogo, presence of 40 French armed ships surveying and fishing, also capture of French spies. Complaint by Harbour Grace Fishing Admiral of destruction of property by loose characters living in huts at the end of the harbour, so just ne'er-do-wells. Skeets. Early skeets. We've seen the early Newfoundland skeet. 1757, this is a big year. Local militia appointed. Michael Gill JP was the honorary colonel. Governor Edwards. Then it just says in 3 words, smallpox epidemic. Nothing else, just, oh, by the way, smallpox. Does that ring a fucking bell for anybody? Number of French prizes captured. A captured Waterford vessel recaptured by her own crew. 1759, Quebec captured by Wolfe. Great power of France in America destroyed. New English church built in St. John's. Pardon me, Reverend Edmund blah blah blah, and that's pretty much it. So, there's a bunch of stuff that happens there. War breaks out between the French and the English again. Pardon me, Jesus, it's gassy, that Michelob. I'm gonna switch to wine, I think. So, chapter 12, I go through the years, so page 285, just noted the population, at the time, I don't know if it says here, 1749, 50, and 51. So during the mid-1700s, the population had become about 6,000 permanent Newfoundland residents. That doesn't include anyone who's sailing over from New England, from France, from Devonshire, West England, anywhere like that. So population was around 6,000. Just a note that I'd like to read here. The period covered by the reign of the second Hanoverian king, so King George II, is distinguished by 2 of the most stirring events in the history of North America: the capture of Louisbourg and the fall of Quebec. For Newfoundland, there was the dawn of a brighter day. England at last determined to confer the blessings of government on the unfortunate colony. It only took fucking 250 years, but finally, how many wars have we got? Not even halfway through the book, and I feel like we've had more wars than fucking Game of Thrones. So, all between the English and the French. Well, the Dutch got into it for a little bit. That's fine. So the population was about 6,000 at the time. And of course, okay, so here we are, and we're in the mid-1700s. So tensions are starting to flare up with the French. Again, surprise, surprise. And this time, because everything was flaring up, because of all the burnings of St. John's and the capture and the Treaty of Utrecht and stuff. So this time we decided to fortify St. John's, Trinity, Ferryland, and Carbonear. Finally, and we appointed a governor. Now, we appointed a governor, which was good in a way for the King's Law and stuff, but there was no real way that we were to enforce the law wisely. Just because a guy was a governor doesn't necessarily mean he was a lawman. You know what I mean? So what the Crown in England should have done was they should have sent over some counsel, some legal counsel to the governor to make the decisions or whatever, to enact the rule of law. But instead, what England did in true fucking it up fashion is that they sent over a few dusty old books. Basically, they sent one to all the major areas. Basically, they were just charters that were written ages ago in fancy formal gentleman talk. And even, okay, so for 1895, it says in here, it was the fucking things were written in a parlance that just wasn't familiar to the guy who was the governor. So whenever it came to trying to actually enact any laws, they were like, well, what the fuck do they mean? What are they talking about? As far as we're concerned, I think in those papers it was saying that the only real person who had any real power to do anything was the king. So it was just it was so old and stuff, it was almost just well, the king just got to deal with it, right? So, and it's not like that would have left any room for any interpretation or ambiguity or anything like that. So that's great. It just says here, instead of the able and energetic Lord Baird, who had experience in the colony and was both a politician and a naval officer, a subordinate, Captain Henry Osborne, commander of the HMS Squirrel, was appointed the first governor of Newfoundland. Sorry, that was before the justice thing, but I had that quote written down because I just thought it was so funny. Instead of sending someone with competence to be the governor who had not only experience in the colonies but probably a bit more idea. No, they sent the captain of the HMS Squirrel to be the governor. So that's Captain Squirrely. Cool. But anyway, that's Henry Osborne. And the thing was, Osborne apparently he was a good guy. He was an honest guy, but he just wasn't a great leader given the times and the demands of everything that was going on. He was just a bit over his head. Not to say he was cruel or a tyrant or anything. He did, without a clear set of laws and a real clear set of court of justice. He almost probably should have been more of a tyrant, really. You know what I mean? And been more strict, because that leads to problems of people actually giving a fuck about what he has to say. So, what have we got here? Yeah, he was a good guy because he didn't really have a set. Literally until 1791, the necessary measure was not passed In consequence, there was nothing but contention, confusion, and uncertainty. Like I said, the ambiguity of the laws, the interpretations, blah, blah, blah. Or, lack of competency, basically, is what it fucking was. So then in 1729, Osborne petitions the Duke of Newcastle for some competency. By the next year, he at least had a courthouse and a prison built. So, good on you, Osborne. You might have not, but you knew how to get a couple of things done. So, good on you there. It's nice to see someone in power who wasn't easily bribed or just like whipping fucking planters and stuff like that. Cool. Moving forward, apparently, though, that said, having a government house and a courthouse and like a prison all fucking built, apparently this did nothing to deter the amount of crime and like misdeeds that were happening and bullshit that was going on the island at the time. In fact, the fishing admirals, those fucking cunts, more or less, they barely even looked at they were so arrogant that they literally looked at themselves and like, well, you're like a winter leader. Like, when we're here in the summer, like, we fucking make the rules, not you, right? So that led to a lot of butting of heads and stuff like that. There was, these guys, they just find a way, don't they? Just every single time to just make it different. It makes you wonder if we didn't have these guys like really gumming up the work, they're like every single opportunity, just like fucking just bringing up against, looking out for their own needs and monopolies of the fishery. Like, it makes you wonder where we'd be at as a province today, doesn't it? Anyhow, moving on. Oh god, stuff frustrates me sometimes. Okay, we went on being so the admirals more or less didn't recognize this as permanent law. They went on being assholes, flat out. These are what my notes actually say. Long story short, this bickering went on for like fucking 50 years. That's all that. So, on page 289 I have here, just to note that war breaks out again. So, in 1742... I just want to make sure I don't jump ahead of the quote here. Okay, yeah. So, in 1742, war was declared between France and England, and in 1745, that most brilliant victory, the capture of Louisburg, was achieved by the American colonists under the gallant Pepperell and Admiral Warren. The siege was being carried under great difficulties until the timely arrival of the English squadron from Newfoundland, which gave the besiegers the necessary additional force and supplies to capture the great French fortress. When the French retired from Placentia in 1713, we got them the fuck out of here, Cape Breton became the headquarters of their fishery. Always bent on aggression, they spent millions of dollars in raising the great fortress at Louisburg. The fishery carried on by the French in Cape Breton, St. John's Island, which is now considered Prince Edward Island, Gaspé, and Newfoundland employed at this time 16,000 men. France was at the height of her power in North America. Her constant raids and insidious attacks on the neighboring colonies raised such a spirit of resentment in New England that immediately the war broke out in 1742. Preparations were commenced for an attack on the Great Island Fortress, Louisburg. I think Great Island Fortress, unless they're talking about, Louisburg. Again, when I just want to say stuff like we got them the fuck out of here, I just mean as like of like half Irish, half English descent. That's all I mean when I say we. I have no stake in this game. I don't give a fuck, really. It's just I say we because I speak the same language as the guy who wrote the book. Don't confuse that in any way as me. I tell you what, in my support of the French, I'm gonna pour up a little bit of really, really high end Yellowtail Cabernet Sauvignon, and I'll let that air for a second and see how that goes. See, I'm biased. I'm like Switzerland, except Newfoundland. I don't know. Okay, anywho. So after the English took Louisburg, this guy, Colonel Bradstreet, became our governor. Again, these governor names, it's just a change Sounds like every time there's a battle, we get a new governor. Bradstreet's the governor. Then the next year, we have this young ass kicker named Captain George Bridges Rodney came on board as our governor. And this guy, he had a few good victories. Apparently, he was pretty young. He was super capable, really like savvy, I guess, in winning battles and stuff. So, so around here, DW, he just goes into some details about what the various governors were like, just as it changed hands. They're all politicians, man. I'm sorry. They're all come from the same cloth. The title teams seem to change regularly, like I mentioned before. Here's a short story about what DW is getting on with at the bottom of page 292. It says, okay, so It's just talking about justice, and there being just a bit of confusion between the governor, the houses and stuff, and just this. It's just a time of transition. Like, we're ramping up the English presence here. Does that make sense? It makes fucking sense. Another case about the same time illustrates the curious way in which justice was dispensed. A man named Martin Doyle was charged with causing the death of his servant at Bay Bulls in a drunken fray. The jury acquitted him by reason no man saw him lift a hand against the deceased, so we all give in our opinion, for the man ought be not guilty. No one, no witness, no crime, right? But it says here, whereupon Doyle was set at liberty on payment of charges to the court. So he was proven not guilty, but then had to pay. That's what they mean about the weird way justice was doled out. The defenses. Okay, we're going to switch off the court system for a second now. Man, he jumps around. So at this time, again, we're in like the 1750s or whatever. The defenses began to get a lot better at the time. So we find from the records that the defenses of the colony were considerable compared to with former times when the English just didn't give a fuck. There was one company of infantry. There was one company of infantry and a train of artillery in St. John's. 66 foot and 19 artillerymen at Placentia. Fort William mounted 1753, in 1753, 7 24-pounders, 6 18-pounders, and 10 6-pounders. Fort George, the lower gun battery, 13 24-pounders, and 10 guns on the platform. And on the south side battery, Fort Frederick, 4 18-pounders. We're armed to the teeth, I guess, at this point, I suppose. It sounds like it, with all those pounders on the go. Not a big fan of that. Sucks, because when you crack a bottle of wine, you're gonna finish it regardless. Anyway, fuck, where am I? That wine kicked me inside the face there. In 1756, the 7 Years' War broke out between the English and the French, if you haven't been listening at all. Around this time, there was a lot of persecution of Catholics on the island, including the Irish, because the French were basically Catholic, the English were Protestant, Irish were also Catholic, so English were really cracking out on the Catholics. So either you can either join the Church of England or you could fuck off, as far as the English were concerned. In 1757, a militia started to form in Newfoundland. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, this is when smallpox broke out, and the governor took steps to try and prevent the spread. Well, how history repeats itself. Oh my god, I'm living inside the book. That's what this is right now. Anyway, we built a big new church in St. John's around that time. That's cool. I guess to spread the influence of the Church of England in St. John's. Big old church. I guess lots of stuff on the go. Page 296. We're going to jump ahead a little bit here. To the top, I have a quote here. Oh, okay. So yeah, we built a big church. I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. I know the church is important. It's an important part of history, and it influences a lot of reasons people do stuff. But in terms of we built churches and who Reverend so-and-so was, unless you're going to do something important, I'm not getting into it. Page 296. The end of George II's reign was signalized. Other old words. The end of George II's reign was signalized by Wolfe's victory. This was a guy, he wasn't in Newfoundland, but he was fighting for the English. Wolfe's victory at Quebec and the complete destruction of the great French Empire in America. Pretty important thing that happened. Wolfe, buddy, you really, a real grand slam for the whole team there. Okay, so in the 7 Years' War, 296, we have okay, so we got this guy Williams. He writes in, and he's just now. Okay, so again, now we're just going to go back to talking about the fishery for a second. Here, the gallant major. Oh, major. Yeah, okay. I'm back. Major Williams, that's this fucking guy. The gallant major is very bitter against Irishmen. He says there are not half so good as Newfoundlanders in English to catch fish. He gives us a lifelike description of the fishery at this period. Its wonderful productiveness. Blah 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 blah. Bunch of numbers. I believe you. Williams complains that the large expense of olive oil, owing to its having been brought to England, the fishermen could not be without the olive oil, to cook salt fish. Butter was scarce and dear. Olive oil is universally used in cooking in Spain, where, and when good, it is the best to fry fish with. Who doesn't know that? The native Spaniard does not care for the mild Lucca liquid. He likes his oil with a flavor. So we wanted olive oil. Super interesting. Also remember when I talked about youngsters and people who would come over to work as servants? First they came over from Ireland and then they were from England and stuff. So there was an increase of this type of activity, so much so that like they would come over and work or something, and sometimes they would go back to West England, that little town that starts with a D. They would go back there, and it would almost be like an event when the Newfoundlanders would come over, or the Irishmen would go back and stuff like that. So I guess that was a thing. There was a lot of servant work at the time. Those who didn't stay and marry and kick around increased. They were called by-boatmen, so I guess that changed, or the youngsters, but now they're called by-boatmen, I suppose, by the parlance of the time. They came over from West England and Ireland. They were servants. A lot of them would go back to Devonshire, take a drink, reading my notes, repeating myself. But eventually, more and more of them started to stay with the development of the seal hunt on the island. So when that kicked off, there's more to do. So now we've got, the seal hunt was always around, and so was whaling and stuff. And now we've got the salmon fishery started, which I mentioned. So now we're ramping up the seal industry as well. They're just quote on page 288. Most writers on Newfoundland have described the seal fishery as only commencing about 1790, but this is a mistake, and we know how fucking DW feels about mistakes and like origin dates. Ever since Newfoundland had permanent settlers, there was more or less a seal fishery carried on at the first simply as a shore fishery, so you could just go out like where you could walk or stay close by, with nets, and then afterwards in punts, and then gradually onto larger boats until schooners came into play. So he's just like, what are you talking about? Like, people talk about like the seal fishery not starting until 1790, but like really, we've been here from the get-go. I think I talked about the fucking seal fishery and whaling by the Spanish and the Biscayans, like in fucking episode 1. Did I not? Did I not? Who's been paying attention? So anyway, he just says that they were here. And as much as there was a seal hunt at the time, there was still a whale hunt happening on. A lot of New Englanders were doing the whaling here at the time. Let's not forget the sweet, delicious whales. And this was happening a lot around Fortune Bay. Given how much trade was being conducted between New England and Newfoundland at the time, there is surprisingly little evidence from the American records of all this taking place. I suppose back in 1895, maybe they couldn't get the records. I don't know what the records say now. Certainly, we can tell from our records that there's a lot of shit going on. But yeah, he just mentions that there's not a whole lot of it going on at the time, which takes us right to the end, almost to the end of the chapter. I'm going to leave you guys there. We get in there. We'll end the reign of King George II. Tomorrow we'll jump into King George III. No appendix, I see. That's a pain in the ass. But thank you guys for the sticking through. So thank you for sticking through episode 15 of Liam Small Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse. 20 pages at a time every single day until the bars reopen. I hope you guys are staying sane. I've gotten into the male equivalent of cutting my bangs. As you can see, maybe this is to go along with my sympathy for the French and the Spanish. Maybe, you know what I mean? Just to prove that I'm not going biased here, right? Mes amis. That's cool. Thank you guys so much. Stay healthy, stay sane, flatten the curve, don't go outside, keep off of Tinder, all that stuff. Whatever it is you're supposed to do it. And I'll see you tomorrow.